The doorbell rang 3 times in sharp succession, each chime louder than the last, slicing through the quiet warmth of Walter Sims's Tuesday evening. He looked up from his newspaper, squinting toward the clock on the wall. 7:30, just after dark. No one ever came by this late. He set the paper aside, took a breath, and stood slowly. His knees ached a little more in winter. Outside, December had already laid its cold hand across Eugene, Oregon, painting the windows with condensation and silencing the streets. When he opened the door, 2 figures stood stiffly on his porch. Andrew, his only son, looked irritated, shifting from one foot to the other in his rumpled work slacks. Behind him stood Karen, arms crossed, chin tilted in that way she had when she was about to say something unpleasant. Her breath puffed out in little white clouds. Walter barely had time to open his mouth before Andrew pushed past him, muttering, "We need to talk." Karen stepped in more slowly, closing the door behind her with a precise click. She looked around the living room like a realtor assessing value, eyes pausing on the built-in shelves Walter had crafted decades ago, the oak floor he had laid board by board. Her silence was judgmental in its own way. Walter felt a flicker of discomfort, as if suddenly he no longer belonged in his own house. Andrew moved toward the fireplace, his movements restless. His shirt was wrinkled, and his hair, usually neat, was disheveled. Something was wrong. Walter lowered himself into his recliner and asked calmly, "What's this about?" Andrew turned quickly, his voice sharp. "It's about this house, Dad. About you sitting on a pile of money while we're out there struggling." The words hit Walter like a slap. Struggling? You have a decent job, a roof over your head. A roof? Karen cut in, stepping forward now. We're packed into a 2-bedroom rental with 2 growing kids. Emily sleeps in the living room, for heaven's sake. Andrew's face flushed. We need a bigger house now, not later, not after you're dead. The kids are growing up, and we're still waiting on an inheritance while you hoard wealth in this museum. Walter gripped the arm of his chair. He looked around, at the fireplace mantel he'd carved by hand, the photo of Eleanor in her yellow Sunday dress, the shelves lined with her books. This house is my life's work, every inch of it. After I'm gone, it'll be yours. That's not good enough, Andrew's voice cracked with desperation. We need help now. Sell the place. Move into a retirement condo. Use the equity for something that matters. Karen's tone softened, but her words didn't. Lyman? Walter, please be reasonable. The kids deserve a real home. They need space, opportunity, stability. We can't give them that while we're living paycheck to paycheck. Walter blinked. His chest felt tight, like someone had reached in and squeezed his ribs. Reasonable, he repeated, his voice quieter. You think it's reasonable to demand I give up the home I built with my own hands? 40 years of my life, and you want me to treat it like a used car? Andrew's jaw tightened. Your life's work doesn't mean anything if it doesn't help your family. You're being selfish, Dad. The word hung in the air like smoke. Selfish. Walter had worked on construction sites through Oregon's blistering summers and biting winters. Every board in this house had passed through his hands. He'd built this place when Emily and Jake were still just daydreams. He had sacrificed vacations, overtime hours, and comfort to make something lasting for them. Now he was being called selfish. He stood slowly, carefully, and looked his son in the eye. Get out. Andrew froze. What? You heard me, both of you. Get out of my house. Karen's lips parted, then closed. She reached for her coat. Andrew stood motionless for a moment longer, eyes wide. Then he turned toward the door, face hardening. Fine, but this isn't over. We'll find another way. Walter didn't respond. He held the door open as they walked out into the cold. The door closed with a heavy thud that seemed to shake the walls. He stood in the silence that followed, breathing shallowly, hands trembling. The house suddenly felt different. He looked around again, not at the walls, not at the furniture, but at the emptiness that had settled like dust over everything. He walked slowly to the window and watched their car pull away. The red taillights disappeared into the darkness like the end of a memory. Behind him, the grandfather clock ticked on. The living room, once filled with warmth and quiet pride, now echoed with the words his son had thrown like stones. Selfish, greedy, hoarder. Walter exhaled deeply and whispered, barely audible even to himself, "That's my son?" He didn't move for a long time. Outside, the street remained quiet, lit only by flickering Christmas lights from the neighbors' yards. But inside Walter Sims' home, something had shifted. Not just the air, not just the mood, but something deeper, something fundamental, like a cracked beam in a house that had stood strong for decades. And this time, it wasn't something he could fix with nails and wood. Walter hadn't moved in over an hour. He sat in his recliner, staring at nothing in particular, as the echo of Andrew's voice replayed in his mind. "You're being selfish, Dad." The words had struck deeper than he expected. They weren't just angry. They were cold, entitled. There had been no respect, no gratitude, no memory of all the sacrifices made over a lifetime. The house had gone silent again, but not in its usual comforting way. This silence had weight. It settled on his shoulders like a blanket soaked in cold water. He looked down at his hands, hands that had framed every window in this house, laid every floorboard, sanded every shelf. He had built this place for Eleanor, for Andrew, for a future they once shared. He rose slowly, knees cracking, and made his way toward the fireplace. The mantel still held their wedding photo. Eleanor was smiling, her eyes bright in that summer yellow dress she loved. He picked up the frame and held it close, her image blurring behind a sudden wave of tears. "You'd know what to say," he whispered to the quiet room. Eleanor had always seen through anger. When someone lashes out, she used to say, they're usually afraid. Maybe Andrew was afraid. Maybe Karen too. Fear had a way of making people desperate. But was that enough to excuse the way they'd spoken to him? The way they'd demanded his life's work be liquidated like a forgotten account? Walter set the photo down gently and climbed the stairs to the bedroom. The upstairs hallway still smelled faintly of cedar. He opened the closet, the one they had shared for decades. Eleanor's dresses still hung there, untouched. He couldn't bring himself to pack them away. Behind the clothes, hidden by the fabric folds, was a small wall safe. He turned the dial with steady fingers. The door swung open with a soft click. Inside were neat bundles of bills, organized in rows. $10,000. He'd saved it over years, a 20 here, a 50 there. Every dollar represented something he'd chosen not to buy. A dinner out, a newer truck, a vacation he never took. This was the just-in-case money. In case the roof failed, in case medical bills came calling, or maybe just in case someone he loved ever needed help. And now they did. Walter reached in and lifted the cash. It felt heavier than it looked, not just in weight, but in meaning. This money wasn't a fortune, but it could be a down payment. It could open a door. He sat on the edge of the bed, counting it again. The bills were crisp, stacked with care. This was something real, something that could bridge a gap. Maybe it wouldn't solve everything, but it was a start. He imagined calling Andrew, offering it calmly, with no pride, no strings attached. Just help. Just love in tangible form. Maybe then Andrew would understand that he wasn't an enemy, just a father trying to do right. Walter returned the money to the safe but left the door unlocked this time. Tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow, they would begin again. The next morning he rose early. The house felt cold, but the sky was clear. He brewed a fresh pot of coffee, sliced a piece of toast, and folded the newspaper, but didn't open it. Instead, he reached for the phone, dialing Andrew's number from memory. It rang twice. "What do you want, Dad?" Walter's voice was gentle. "I've been thinking about what you said. You're right. Family should come first. I want to help." Silence stretched between them. "I've saved some money. $10,000. It's not everything, but it's what I can give. It's yours." Andrew's response came like a punch. "10,000? Are you serious? That's it?" Walter blinked, startled. "It's all I have to give freely. I thought it might help with a down payment." "A down payment?" Andrew's voice rose. "Dad, do you even know what houses cost? This is insulting. You sit in that house with all that equity, and you throw us scraps like we're beggars?" The words hit harder than Walter expected. He gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, the cool laminate grounding him. "Andrew," he said, trying to hold his voice steady, "that money, it's everything I've saved. It's meant with love." "Love?" Andrew's tone cracked with anger. "You greedy old man, you're hoarding wealth while we drown." Walter stood there stunned. His breath caught in his throat. "I worked for 40 years to build this house. Every board, every window. I skipped meals, took double shifts. And what good does it do us locked away in your precious house?" Andrew spat. "Sell it. Stop clinging to memories of a dead woman and help your living family." Walter froze. Eleanor. Andrew had brought Eleanor into this. Dismissed her memory like it was a roadblock. The line went dead. Walter stood in the kitchen, phone still in hand, listening to the dial tone hum in his ear. His coffee sat forgotten, already cold. He returned the phone to the hook and stared out the window. The light had changed. Morning sun now angled through the glass, casting long shadows across the oak table he had built. His hands trembled slightly as he sat down. Across from him, the empty chair Eleanor used to sit in remained pulled out, like she had just stepped away. But she wasn't there, and neither, it seemed, was the boy he had raised. 3 days passed without a single word from Andrew. Walter tried to keep himself busy. He raked the last of the leaves in the backyard, oiled the hinges on the front gate, and took apart the old coffee grinder just to see if it still worked. But no amount of busy work could silence the echo of his son's voice calling him a greedy old man, or the sting of Eleanor's name being dragged into an argument about money. Then, just after 9 on Thursday morning, the phone rang. Walter stared at it as if it were a snake. It rang 4 times before he picked it up, slow and cautious. "Dad," Andrew's voice came through, soft, almost hesitant. I was out of line. I've been thinking about what I said. I behaved like a fool." Walter didn't respond immediately. The change in tone felt too smooth, too polished. "Karen made me call," Andrew continued. "She says we owe you an apology. We want you to come for Christmas Eve dinner. The kids miss you." Walter remained quiet. "Emily's been practicing a song to play for you on her recorder. Jake has a science project he wants to show you. Please, Dad, come." The mention of the children softened something inside him. He could picture Emily's gap-toothed smile and Jake's bright eyes behind oversized glasses. He nodded, though Andrew couldn't see it. "I'll bring Eleanor's Christmas pudding," he said finally. "That would be perfect," Andrew replied, relief pouring through the phone. Walter scribbled down their address on a notepad and tucked it into his shirt pocket, where it rested close to his chest. It felt like both a promise and a warning. That weekend, Walter ventured into town for gifts. The shopping center was alive with last-minute holiday energy. He chose a Lego architecture set for Jake, something complex to keep a smart 10-year-old busy. For Emily, he picked an art kit with colored pencils, watercolor tubes, and thick sketch paper. He remembered her drawings from last summer: flowers, houses, and a picture of Eleanor in her favorite sun hat. Sunday and Monday were for pudding. He pulled out Eleanor's handwritten recipe from the drawer where it had lived untouched for 3 years. The paper was soft from age, the ink slightly smudged near the edges. Her directions were simple but firm. Day 1, mix. Day 2, steam. Day 3, serve. He followed them like scripture. The kitchen filled with the warm smell of cinnamon, nutmeg, and candied orange peel. He used her old blue mixing bowl and steamer pot. As he folded the batter, he could almost hear her humming along with the radio, wiping her hands on the same apron he now wore. On Christmas Eve, he chose his navy suit, the one he hadn't worn since her funeral. It still fit, though the sleeves hung a little longer than they used to. He pressed a white shirt with deliberate care, paying close attention to the collar, just as Eleanor would have reminded him. He placed the pudding in fresh cheesecloth and tied it with red ribbon. The gifts went into brown paper bags with more ribbon around the handles. Simple, honest, the way he liked things. At 5:30, he loaded everything into his old truck and drove across town to Andrew's neighborhood. Their house sat in a cul-de-sac of near-identical colonial-style homes, each one wrapped in glowing lights and inflatable snowmen. The sameness made Walter's hands itch. He missed the imperfections of his own place, the creaks in the floor, the way the back door stuck when it rained. He parked behind Andrew's car and carried the bags to the porch. Through the wide front windows, he saw the family gathered around the living room. Karen arranging silverware, Emily dancing around the tree, Jake bent over a book on the couch. He heard Emily's excited voice. "Is that Grandpa's truck?" The door opened before he could knock. Andrew stood smiling, wearing a sweater that probably cost more than Walter's entire outfit. "Dad, right on time." Walter stepped inside. The warmth of the house enveloped him, fragrant with roast turkey, and something sweet in the oven. Emily and Jake rushed toward him, wrapping their arms around his waist. "Grandpa, you came!" "I brought presents," he said with a small smile. Karen emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a Christmas-themed apron. "Walter, you look wonderful. Let me take your coat." Her tone was warm, maybe too warm, but Walter said nothing. He handed her the pudding and the kids their gifts. Jake's eyes widened at the Lego set. Emily squealed over the art supplies. "Can we draw together tomorrow, Grandpa?" "We'll see what your parents say," he replied, ruffling her hair. Dinner was already set. The table glowed with candles, fine china, and tall crystal glasses. Walter couldn't remember the last time he'd seen such effort from Andrew. They sat down, and for a while, everything felt normal. Jake told him about his volcano project. Emily tried to play a song on her recorder. Karen complimented the pudding smell. Andrew talked about work. There was even laughter. Walter almost let his guard down. Almost. Then Andrew stood and said, "Before dessert, I want to make a toast." He walked to the sideboard and retrieved a bottle of wine. "This is from the vineyard we visited in Napa last summer," he told Karen with a wink. "Let's toast to family." He poured carefully into 5 glasses, lining them up neatly on a silver tray. His movements were precise, almost rehearsed. From the head of the table, Walter watched every step. Then Andrew did something strange. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white packet, no larger than a sugar substitute. His fingers moved fast, tearing it open and tilting its contents into one specific glass, the one placed where Walter was sitting. Walter said nothing. He didn't blink. He kept cutting his turkey as if he hadn't seen a thing, but inside his chest tightened. His breathing slowed. Every movement became deliberate. "Andrew," Karen called from the kitchen, "come help with the pie." Andrew hesitated, then set the tray down in front of Walter and left the room. The second the kitchen door clicked shut, Walter reached for the tray and switched the glasses. Walter stared at the wine glass sitting quietly in front of his plate. It caught the light from the chandelier above, casting a soft crimson glow across the white tablecloth. On the surface, it looked no different from the others. Elegant, festive, innocent. But Walter had seen what Andrew had done. The sleight of hand, the careful tilt of the wrist, the faint puff of white powder that vanished into liquid. His heart beat steadily, but every muscle in his body was alert. He had switched the glasses the moment Andrew and Karen disappeared into the kitchen. There had been no hesitation, no panic, just a firm hand and a quiet decision. Now, as he sat at the head of the table, the spiked wine glass rested 18 inches to his right, in front of Andrew's empty seat. Jake and Emily were still chatting across from him, blissfully unaware. Jake explained how he'd used baking soda and vinegar to create a fake volcano. Emily waved her new colored pencils, asking Walter which color he liked best. He forced a smile. "Green," he replied. "Always liked green." Footsteps approached. The kitchen door creaked open. Andrew returned first, holding a pie server. "Sorry about that." The pie needed a few more minutes, he said cheerfully, then looked toward Walter's glass. For a moment, his gaze paused. Walter didn't flinch. Karen followed, drying her hands on her apron. Her eyes darted between the table and Walter's face, like a stage actor checking cues. They resumed their seats. Andrew lifted his wine glass, the one now containing whatever he had meant for Walter. To family, he said, smiling wide. To forgiveness, to letting go of the past. Walter picked up his own glass slowly. It smelled rich, with notes of dark cherry. He pretended to sip, barely wetting his lips. Across the table, Andrew took a deep swallow. Karen raised her glass, but only took a small sip. Her eyes never left Walter. The children clinked their grape juice cups together and giggled. Walter set his glass down with deliberate care, then folded his napkin and placed it neatly on the table. "Andrew," he said quietly, "what did you put in my wine?" The dining room fell into silence. Andrew blinked. "What?" "I saw you pour something into the glass at my seat, but that's not the glass I drank from." Color drained from Andrew's face. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He glanced at the glass in his hand, then at Walter. Karen's mouth dropped open. "What are you talking about?" Walter didn't raise his voice. "I switched the glasses while you were in the kitchen. Whatever you put in mine, Andrew, you drank it." Andrew pushed his chair back so suddenly it screeched against the hardwood floor. "No," he whispered. "No, you're lying." His hands flew to his stomach, then to his throat. Karen stood too. "Andrew?" His face twisted. He doubled over slightly, breathing hard. "Daddy?" Emily's voice was small and afraid. "Are you okay?" Andrew didn't answer. He lurched to his feet, one hand gripping the edge of the table, the other covering his mouth. I need... He didn't finish the sentence. He staggered from the room, down the hallway. A second later, the bathroom door slammed. Then came the sound, wrenching, violent, raw, the unmistakable sound of a body rejecting what it never should have ingested. Gagging, coughing, moaning. The children stared wide-eyed. Emily started crying. Karen stood frozen, hands trembling. She looked from the hallway to Walter. "You don't understand," she said through tears. "We needed the money." Walter remained seated. "You wanted to poison me," he said, voice still calm. "For an inheritance." "It wasn't poison," she cried. "It was just a sleeping pill. We just wanted you to understand how desperate we are." Walter looked at her with a mix of pity and disgust. He wouldn't be that sick from a sleeping pill. Karen's voice cracked. "The mortgage is killing us. The kids need things. We're buried. You're sitting on a house worth hundreds of thousands and we're drowning." "I offered you 10,000, Walter reminded her. "He hung up on me." Karen's mask slipped. Her face twisted. "That's nothing compared to what you're worth. You could sell that house and still live comfortably. Why should you sit on all that while your grandchildren go without?" Behind them, the retching continued. Walter stood. He walked slowly to the coat closet. The children clung to each other on the love seat, watching silently. "I'm leaving," he said. Karen ran after him. "Please, you can't just walk away. Think of Jake and Emily." Walter turned and looked at the children. "The gifts are yours to keep," he said softly. "I'm sorry you had to see this." "Why is Daddy so sick?" Jake asked, his voice shaking. Walter opened the door. "Ask your mother." Karen reached for his arm. "If you leave now, we'll tell everyone what you did. We'll call the police." Walter looked down at her hand on his sleeve until she let go. "Tell them what?" he asked. "That your husband tried to poison me and poisoned himself instead?" The bathroom had gone quiet. No more moaning. No more coughing. Just silence. Walter stepped outside into the cold December air. Karen's voice followed him. "Walter, you can't do this. Don't leave us like this." But he didn't turn back. He walked to his truck with steady steps, opened the door, and climbed inside. The engine started on the first try, humming like always. Through the rearview mirror, he saw Karen standing in the doorway, framed by Christmas lights and her own desperation. He didn't wave. He didn't hesitate. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. The house was silent when Walter returned. He slipped off his shoes by the door and hung his coat carefully on the same hook he had used for decades. The quiet wasn't oppressive anymore. It was steadying, like a held breath finally exhaled. He poured himself a cup of coffee, not because he wanted it, but because the act gave his hands something to do. The smell of the roast grounded him. Outside, the neighborhood glowed with soft Christmas lights. Children's voices echoed faintly through the air. Laughter, the rustle of wrapping paper, distant carols playing from an open window. Walter sat down at the kitchen table, the same one he and Eleanor had picked out from a yard sale in 1983. He looked across to the chair she had always occupied. For a moment, he imagined her there, elbows on the table, reading glasses low on her nose, smiling gently. "I'm all right," he whispered to the space she used to fill. "It's done." The next day was Christmas. He didn't decorate. He didn't bake. He made oatmeal for breakfast and read the newspaper cover to cover. For once, he didn't feel guilty about the silence. It was his. Mid-afternoon, there was a knock at the door, not a sharp, urgent knock like Andrew's had been, but a polite, uncertain one. Mrs. Patterson stood there in her winter coat, holding a tin of cookies. "Just wanted to drop these off," she said. "I made too many." Walter smiled faintly and accepted the tin. "Thank you." She hesitated. "I heard. Something happened over at your son's place. Ambulance came late last night." Walter didn't flinch. "I hadn't heard." She tilted her head, studying him. "Well, whatever's going on, I hope everyone's all right." He nodded once. "Merry Christmas, Connie." She walked back across the street, casting a few curious glances over her shoulder. Walter placed the tin of cookies on the counter and went back to his book. The days passed quietly. He repaired a loose stair tread, replaced a flickering porch light, and took down the few outdoor decorations he had managed to hang before all this began. With each task, his hands felt steadier, his thoughts clearer. On December 27th, he stood at his mailbox, flipping through circulars and utility bills, when Mrs. Patterson leaned across the fence again. "Walter," she said in a lowered voice, "did you hear? Andrew's still in the hospital. Something with his stomach. They're not sure what caused it. Karen's been there every day with the kids." Walter adjusted his grip on the envelopes. "That's unfortunate." She squinted at him. "You're not going to visit?" Walter looked up, his voice calm. "I'm sure he's in good hands. The doctors will do what they can." She didn't press further. That evening, Walter sat in Eleanor's chair by the living room window. A mug of coffee warmed his palms, though he barely sipped it. The lights from across the street blinked cheerfully, reflecting off the glass in muted colors. He didn't feel anger, not anymore. There was nothing left to argue about, nothing to salvage. Some things, when broken, didn't need repairing. They needed replacing. He thought of Andrew, pale and desperate at the table, and the sound of his footsteps as he ran from the room. He thought of Emily's tears and Jake's confused stare. He thought of Karen's voice cracking with panic, and how quickly it had shifted into veiled threats. And still, no regret. He had given them everything he could. Years of labor, tuition payments, a first car, a second loan, a roof over their heads when times were lean, support, advice, patience, and in return, a drugged wine glass on Christmas Eve. Walter looked down at his hands again. They were old hands now, spotted, lined, but still steady. These hands had built a home, raised a child, and buried a wife. They had also poured a glass of wine, and made a choice. He rose from the chair and crossed to the old safe upstairs. He opened it, revealing the neat bundle of $10,000 still untouched. He held it for a moment, then returned it gently. On the same shelf sat his will. He picked it up, flipping through the pages with quiet resolve. At the very back, there was a phone number scrawled in blue ink. Mr. Brooks, his lawyer. Walter walked downstairs, picked up the phone, and dialed. The line rang once, twice. Then, Brooks and Keller Law Office. "This is Walter Sims," he said. "I need to make some changes to my estate." The first day of January arrived cold and clear. Walter stood at the edge of his front yard, a rake in one hand, and looked out over the quiet street. Most houses still had their lights up, though many were turned off now. Holiday magic, fading. He preferred it this way, calmer, more honest. A crisp breeze rustled through the trees, scattering the last of the brittle brown leaves. Walter bent slowly and gathered them into a pile. It felt good to move, to work, to reclaim his space. The call to Mr. Brooks had been brief but decisive. Walter had changed his will. There would be no inheritance for Andrew or Karen, not a single dollar. Instead, his savings would go to a children's hospital, somewhere far from this town, far from entitlement and manipulation. His house, the one he had built with his own two hands, would be donated to a local veterans group. They had already sent someone to visit. A young man named Robert had walked through the halls with quiet respect, his eyes wide as Walter described how each board had been placed. "You built this yourself?" Robert had asked, touching the crown molding. "I did," Walter replied. "Every nail, every joint." They had shaken hands on the front porch before Robert left. It felt right. The only thing left unresolved had been the grandchildren. Walter didn't blame them. Children weren't born greedy. They were shaped. And though he could no longer be part of their everyday lives, he would not punish them for what their parents had done. 2 small trust funds had been arranged, modest but meaningful, enough to pay for college, or a business startup, or just a safe place to live when they were ready. The funds would be locked until they turned 25. No early withdrawals, no parental control. Let them choose their own paths without strings. Walter returned inside and placed his coat on the hook. The hallway smelled faintly of cedar and old paint, the same way it had for decades. He walked into the kitchen and opened the window just enough to let in the morning air. Then he poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and sat in Eleanor's chair. The photograph of her still sat on the mantel. Her smile, forever frozen in that yellow summer dress, filled the room with more warmth than the radiator ever could. "I did it, Ellie," he said quietly. "I finally did it." He had stood up for himself, not with anger or cruelty, but with clarity. He had drawn the line and stepped back from the edge, no longer begging for kindness, no longer afraid to be alone. He was not alone. He had his memories, his peace, and the quiet dignity of a man who had weathered storms without losing himself. Outside, the mail truck rolled down the street. Walter rose, stepped outside, and waved to the driver. "Happy New Year," the man called. Walter smiled. It just might be. He walked back inside, gently closed the door behind him, and sat once more, surrounded not by silence, but by something better. Solitude. The kind you earn. The kind you build. The kind no one can take from you. There's a quiet kind of strength that comes from knowing who you are, even when the world forgets, or worse, tries to rewrite your worth. In the end, Walter didn't shout or storm. He simply stood. And sometimes, that's the most powerful thing a person can do. He didn't choose revenge. He chose dignity. He didn't respond with bitterness, but with a calm, unwavering resolve to protect the life he built, the love he lost, and the values he refused to let die. The house, once filled with shadows of betrayal, became again a place of purpose, because Walter remembered something his son forgot. That legacy isn't about money. It's about meaning. That final winter morning, as the wind rustled the bare trees and coffee steamed in his mug, Walter reclaimed more than his home. He reclaimed himself. No angry words, no public spectacle, just the steady heartbeat of a man who knew what mattered. The lesson here is simple, but deep. You don't need to raise your voice to raise the truth. Justice doesn't always roar. It often walks in on quiet feet, wearing calloused hands and patient eyes. And sometimes, the people we overlook, underestimate, or push aside carry the deepest kind of wisdom, the kind forged in silence, in work, in years spent putting others first. In a world quick to judge worth by loudness or wealth, Walter's story reminds us to never mistake quiet for weakness, or age for irrelevance. He didn't demand respect. He lived in a way that earned it. And when the time came, he didn't beg for kindness. He chose better. Like an old oak standing at the edge of a storm-swept field, Walter bent, but never broke. His roots ran deep, not just in the woodwork of his home, but in the quiet acts of sacrifice and love he offered for decades. In the end, the very strength that others took for granted became the light that led him forward. It's a good reminder for all of us. Hold the line when the world asks you to give up your soul for someone else's comfort, because dignity once kept becomes a legacy no one can steal. Maybe you know a Walter, or maybe you are one. Maybe you've felt dismissed, forgotten, or underestimated. But remember this: truth has a way of rising, and sometimes the ones we thought the weakest hold the key to the most enduring justice. So tonight, take a moment, breathe in the stillness. Think of the places, the people, the principles you've protected. And if this story touched your heart, consider passing it on, not for clicks or likes, but because someone out there may need the reminder. Even in the coldest seasons, there's warmth in choosing what's right. And like the last light left glowing in the window, sometimes quiet integrity is the only beacon we need.